Hi everyone, Dr. Drew Ramsey here. Welcome back, or if this is your first video, make sure to subscribe below so you don't miss any of the new science coming out about nutritional psychiatry. Now, I'm a nutritional psychiatrist. I'm really interested in how food can be used to optimize mental health and have really focused with our clinical group on how we can integrate nutrition and nutrition plans into the treatment of mental health disorders. There's a new piece of science that is very striking and leads to some direct ideas about things you can do in your everyday life to decrease your risk of anxiety and depression. And let's just cut to the chase. It's cutting out French fries. Now that's a painful thing to say. I really like French fries and I really like potatoes in general. But there's some new data that was just published on April 24th that highlights both the epidemiological risk of eating fried foods, as well as the underlying mechanisms by which fried foods disturb our mental health. So let's get into the study. The first part of the study, the researchers looked at the UK Biobank data set. This is a very large data set of over 140,000 individuals, many of whom completed dietary questionnaires. And they looked at individuals who ate the most fried food. They said this was more than one serving of fried food a day, and found that there was a 12% risk increase of anxiety and a 7% increased risk of depression. But the researchers wonder, how does that happen? How is it that fried foods can disturb our mental health? And this is where the paper gets really, really complex, but also really interesting. Using an animal model of zebrafish, a fish that likes to travel in packs, they found that acrylamide, which is one of the nasty byproducts of the frying process, causes all kinds of genetic expression changes in the brain of the zebrafish. Now first, what is acrylamide? Acrylamide is a molecule that's created by the Maillard reaction. This is when we combine a reducing sugar like glucose or fructose with an amino acid under the condition of high heat, essentially frying. So as you heat foods up really, really hot, you're moving this reaction along and creating this toxic byproduct, acrylamide. And you find a lot of acrylamide in fried foods, particularly French fries. That's the major source of acrylamide in most human diets. It's also one of those components of a Western diet. As you've seen in these videos and as we've talked about in many of the research studies in nutritional psychiatry, a Western dietary pattern is correlated with poor mental health outcomes, increased risk of depression and anxiety and ADHD and dementia. And fried foods is a major component for many people of a Western dietary pattern. Acrylamide is responsible for a lot of that. So how does this happen? Well, the researchers note several mechanisms by which acrylamide disturbs our mental health by disturbing brain metabolism. And it's really fascinating to think that a French fry at the end of your fork can travel all the way into your brain, at least the acrylamide can, and disrupt gene regulation. And that's exactly what these researchers have found. Papers like this are really exciting because they combine an epidemiological data set which shows us correlations but doesn't really tell us exactly how things happen, with an animal model that helps us appreciate what are the mechanisms at play that cause this increased risk of depression and anxiety. It turns out that acrylamide does really horrible things for our brain. For example, the blood-brain barrier is a special layer of cells that protect our brain. However, the cells are held together by a protein that make what are called tight junctions. And it turns out that acrylamide decreases the expression of tight junctions. And so what happens is that your brain gets a little leaky. This barrier is more permeable, meaning that our brain isn't able to really protect itself as well. That's one of the ways that acrylamide in fried foods can disturb brain metabolism. Another mechanism that the researchers noted was that acrylamide from fried foods also can disturb the lipid metabolism of our brain. The brain is filled with fat. Your brain is about 60% fat, and particularly the brain has a lot of polyunsaturated fatty acids. Now, these are amazing fats like the omega-3 fats that get a lot of attention when it comes to brain health. They're very long. They have about 22 to 24 carbons, and they have a lot of what are called double bonds. So they're storing a lot of energy. Well, the problem is when we oxidize these fats, called lipid peroxidation, inflammation. And that happens much more so when acrylamide is present. So essentially, we're affecting the brain by increasing inflammation, by decreasing the protection of the blood-brain barrier. They had a really interesting aspect of this paper using an animal model of zebrafish. Now, you might wonder, what does zebrafish have to do with acrylamide and French fries? Well, zebrafish like to travel in groups. They're social fish. And when they encounter something new, they tend to want to pack together. If you look at the diagram here behind me, this is a unique environment that the researchers created for the zebrafish. They have one side of the tank where there's nothing new, and then they have another side of the tank where there's what's called a novel feature. And generally, if you look at the control group, zebrafish are going to cluster together. When they see something novel, they're going to kind of dive down, group together, and kind of hide behind it. And you can see that in the control group. That's a heat map of the zebrafish's movements in this tank. Then look what happens when the zebrafish get treated with acrylamide at increasing doses. And it's very easy to see in this diagram. Boy, they behave really differently. First of all, they don't cohese as a group as much. And then secondly, they're not as exploratory. Look at it. None of them go really check out the novel feature. They're not acting like zebrafish usually act. And the researchers correlate this animal model to some of what we see in anxiety and depression, that people are more isolated, less social, less exploratory when you're struggling with these mental health conditions. So it's a really nice illustration of how these researchers have taken an epidemiological finding. We know that Western dietary patterns and increased consumption of fried foods is correlated with an increased risk of depression and anxiety. And then the researchers have done something really nice for us, which is they've explored in a very detailed way how genetic expression and protein expression is affected by the toxic compound found in fried foods, namely acrylamide. Now, you're wondering, does this mean you can never eat fried foods again, or how can you solve this problem? Well, we've got a really easy solution for you, and it's really how I consume most of my potatoes these days, which is oven roasting your potatoes in olive oil. When you oven roast foods, you're decreasing the acrylamide content by about 90%. And so you can still enjoy that delicious, crispy potato taste, but without getting all of those toxins that disrupt your blood-brain barrier, cause more neuroinflammation, and increase your risk of mental health disorders like depression and anxiety. Another thing to note is that fried foods often are fried in soybean oil, and this is one of the major sources of omega-6 fats in humans these days. Meaning that if you look at our soybean oil consumption, it's gone up about 1,000-fold since 1900. We've never really ever, as humans, eaten lots and lots of soybean oil, but it's really the major oil that's used in terms of fried foods and also a very frequent component of ultra-processed foods. It's a great paper to help us think about some specific foods that we can cut out of our diet or shift away from that can have an impact over time on our mental health. So I'm sorry to let you know about the toxins in your French fries, but I hope you hear the hopeful recommendation that by making a simple switch of soaking your potatoes in a little bit of olive oil, maybe put a little rosemary in there, slide them in the oven, that you can drastically reduce your consumption of acrylamide and decrease your risk of anxiety and depression over time. Thanks so much for watching. If you're liking this content about nutritional psychiatry, please check out some of the free resources on my website, like Brain Food on a Budget, or our most recent course, Healing the Modern Brain, to help you improve your mental fitness. And make sure to subscribe below so you don't miss any of these videos. It's great to see you. Thanks for spending a little time with me talking about the science of food and mental health, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.